For topic two, we're going to look at adding vectors geometrically. So in a bit, we'll talk about adding vectors kind of more like algebraically, but for now, we're going to do it very visually. Okay. So there are two methods, excuse me, that can be used to add vectors geometrically. I pretty much stick to just one of them. Okay. Consider the following. There are two vectors, u and v. The sum of the two vectors indicated by vector u plus vector v is called the resultant vector. Okay, so after you add two vectors, you basically create a third vector that is the resultant vector. We'll call it just the resultant. Okay, you could add more than two vectors. You could certainly add three vectors. You'd still get some resultant. Okay, and I will show you kind of how to do this. Okay, so the first method is the triangle method, and this is the one that I'm going to use. It's the one that I remember doing. It's the one I'm more comfortable with. I kind of have a vague memory of this parallelogram method, but to me it's more confusing, so I pretty much stick with just the triangle. Okay, so essentially what you do is you have these two vectors. We're going to call them u and vector v. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to start with vector u and we're going to draw it. Okay, so we're going to draw vector u. It's going to have some initial point, it's going to have some terminal point, and then it's going to have some direction. Okay, from the terminal point of u, we're going to then draw vector v. Okay, so vector v I've circled in red. So I'm going to start at that terminal point for vector u, and I'm going to draw vector v, which is going to then have some terminal point. So the resultant is going to start at the initial point for your first vector, and it's going to end at the terminal point for your second vector. Okay, so this right here becomes the resultant, which is the vector u plus the vector v. Okay, so the resultant begins where u begins and it ends where v ends. Okay, so there you have it. Now, the parallelogram method, you kind of draw your two vectors and then you sort of draw like another vector parallel to the first and another vector parallel to the second, and then the vector that goes between them ends up being the resultant. I think it's way too confusing to do that one, so I don't generally mess with that one at all. Okay, so let's look down here. Okay, so it says use the vectors below to perform each vector addition. Okay, so we have, it's kind of hard to tell, but we have W, and I didn't put the little hats on them. I like legitimately could not figure out how to do this in Desmos. So draw your hats on now. We have a hat, and a hat, okay? So we have these three vectors. So W is kind of purple, red is V, and then blue is U, okay? So the first thing I do before I start adding my vectors is I kind of make note of the direction. What is my horizontal direction? What is my vertical direction for each of these vectors, okay? So I'm going to try to stick with the colors just to be consistent. So we're going to use purple for W. So this is my initial point. This is my terminal point. How in the tarnation do I get from my initial point to my terminal point? Well, I would go to the right two, and then I would go up one, two, three, four. So I'm actually going to stuff those kind of inside so they don't get too jumbled here. So I go right two, up four to get from the initial point of W to the terminal point of W. Okay. Now V we're going to do in red. So this is my initial point. This is my terminal point. To get from one to the other, I would go to the right one, two, three, four, and then I would go up two. So to the right four, up two. And then I'm going to use a bluish color for U. So this is my initial point. This is my terminal point. And I would go to the right one, and then I would go up three. Okay, so keep that in mind because we're going to use that to help us add. Okay, now when you're dealing with these vectors, they don't have to have like a set starting point. It's not like there's an ordered pair that this is where it has to always start. You can kind of put it wherever you want. Okay, we're just talking about direction and magnitude. Okay, so length and direction is all that really matters. You can have it sort of wherever you want it to be. So let me scroll. There we go. So I want to kind of try to keep all of this in one picture. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take U plus, I want to take vector W plus vector U. So U, I'm going to circle it in this blue color so we can remember what's what. And W, I'm going to circle it in this purple color. Okay, so I want to start with W. Okay, so I can start it really anywhere I want. So just make sure it all kind of fits in this grid. So I'm going to start mine right here. So this is my initial point. Now remember, we already found our directions, like the movement horizontally and the movement vertically. So for W, I go to the right 2, and then I go up 4. So from whatever my initial point is, I go to the right 1, 2, and then I go up 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's my terminal point. So connecting those that becomes my vector. So this shows vector W, and I'm going to put a little vector W here just to make it really clear in case somebody can't tell the difference between purple, red, and blue. Okay, now I want to start by graphing or plotting or drawing vector U. Okay, so the way we add vectors is you draw your first one, and then whatever the terminal point of your first vector is, that's going to become the initial point of your second vector. Okay, so the initial point of U has to start right here where W ended, okay? And then remember, the movement for you is to go to the right 1 and then up 3, and I forgot to label those. Okay, so I'm going to go to the right 1, and then I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3. And then the resultant I'm going to do in black, okay? So this one's going to be a little bit hard to see, but the resultant is going to go from the initial point of W to the terminal point of U. So this is vector W plus vector U. Okay, so I'm going to always do my resultant in black for these three. Okay, so this one's a little hard to see. It's very skinny, the picture, but that is your vector addition. Okay, it's very geometric at this point. We will talk about how we could do this algebraically, but for now, we're just going to draw pictures. Okay, for part B, we have vector W plus vector V. So I'm going to circle them in their appropriate colors so that we don't get confused. So purple and red. And then remember, my resultant I'll always do in black, okay? So we're going to start with W. So let me go back to purple. And we can start it anywhere. You just want to start it to where you make sure you have plenty of room to kind of add all your vectors together. So I'm going to start mine here again, okay? It doesn't have to start there. I'm just choosing to start there so I can make sure I have plenty of room. Okay, now remember the movement. Horizontally, vector goes to the right 2, and then it goes up 4. So I'm going to go over 1, 2, and then up 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is my vector W. Okay? Now I want to, from the terminal point of W, I want to have the initial point for V. So remember, the terminal point of your first vector becomes the initial point of your second vector. So this is going to be where I start V. And then the movement for V is it moves to the right 4, and then it goes up 2. So I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, up 2. Whoa. So there's my terminal point. And remember, the resultant is going to go from the initial point of your first vector to the terminal point of your second vector. Okay, so let me label that really quick. And then that right there is W plus V. Okay, so pretty easy to do. It's not hard. I would encourage you to get different colors. Okay, so I do have some colored pencils in my office. If you need some way to differentiate and have different colors, come by my office and I'll give you a couple colored pencils to use. Okay, finally, we're going to do vector U plus vector V. So let's see, vector V is red. Vector U is this blue color. Oh, I forgot to label U here. Let's make it the actual blue color. Okay, so we're going to start with U. So you can start it literally anywhere you want. So I'm just going to start here just because it's easy. I know it'll all fit if I start here. So I want to remind myself of the movement of U. So it moves horizontally to the right 1 and then vertically up 3. So from whatever my initial point is, I'm going to go to the right 1 and then up 1, 2, 3. That becomes my terminal point on the vector U. Okay. And then I want to switch over to red for vector V. So my initial point is going to be so my initial point for V is going to be the terminal point of U. And remember our movements for V. V moves to the right 4, and then it moves vertically up 2. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then up 1, 2. That's my terminal point for V. Ah, and then let me go ahead and label that V. And then our resultant is going to be whoo, right here. So that is U plus V. Okay, so vector addition is not the hardest thing you've ever done. Geometrically, it's kind of fun. You're kind of limited to space. We can't have anything too crazy because, we got to do it on a sheet of paper. But in a bit, we'll learn how to add vectors kind of more algebraically, like just on paper. Okay, but that is your vector addition. In the next video, we will talk about some properties of vectors and yeah, we'll do some fun stuff. There's a lot in this section. Okay, so there's a lot coming.